We're going to talk to you for a little bit about teaching the SDGs through experiential learning. We're going to share very quickly 4 programs that we have done as part of RCE Greater Atlanta, which was approved in December 2017, so we're about 4 years old. And we are a big network of approximately 10 higher education institutions from across the Greater Atlanta region, which we called Greater Atlanta, not Metro Atlanta, because it includes University of Georgia, which is in Athens, and they agreed to be included in the Greater Atlanta terminology, even though they're really not. But we go all the way out to UGA, and we, of course, are multi-stakeholders, so we have a variety of different partners outside of higher ed. And we're gonna share with you here 4 key SDG initiatives that we have facilitated or coordinated over the years that are a combination of curricular and co-curricular programs. And then after we describe them to you, we're going to talk to you a little bit about overall what we think we've learned that has gone really well or that we have improved over the years, and then just pose some discussion questions. We hope to just do about half presentation and half discussion so that we can get your help in thinking through some of the things that we continually grapple with around this topic. So the first program that we tried was the Unitar Youth and the SDGs e-learning course, and Chris is going to tell you about this and the next program.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? Okay. So as Jenny said, this was the very first initiative, especially focused on students that we undertook at RCE Greater Atlanta. In late 2018, we applied for and received a grant from the Turner Foundation, and we created a youth fellowship, and included 14 students across multiple institutions in RCE Greater Atlanta. And they developed and led the process to create an e-learning course, which is hosted on the Unitar learning site and is still active and available. Those 14 students were put into pairs of 2 and each assigned a specific SDG. At that time, we had 7 SDGs that the Atlanta area was focusing on in our RCE, so each of the student pairs focused on one of those 7 SDGs. And they developed the course materials for this e-learning course, which included information about the SDG and then also included 2 case studies, one with a local partner and one with a global partner that highlighted their work on the Sustainable Development Goal that they were focusing on. As part of the process, the students actually had to design the interview questions. They had to connect with a particular partner, do the interview. Many of them were actually videos that were created highlighting the work of the partner. So it was pretty extensive. It was a partnership with CFAL, Unitar, and RCE Greater Atlanta, along with the various institutions, and it was co-led by Georgia Tech and Kennesaw State, which is one of our very active partners. So as I said, this is still active on the Unitar site, so we're very proud of that, and we've used it in a bunch of different ways, other courses where we have students do learning on the SDGs. And then in terms of key outcomes, besides the course itself, there was a extensive professional development for the student, leadership training, advocacy, learning how to do research, networking. We created a lot of local global partnership connections via these SDG pairs, and then we also published a case study in sustainability and climate change as a result of this. No, that's you. Oh no, is that me? Oh, that's you.
This is another program that we had that I co-led with my colleague Amy Henry, who's the Executive Director of International Education at Georgia Tech. And it was a seminar in a global community of practice called Think Global, Act Local to Advance the UN SDGs. This is something that we actually did at the request of our president, Angel Cabrera, who came from George Mason a couple years ago, and he is the person who launched and now chairs the University Global Coalition, which is another UN-affiliated SDG-related higher education initiative. And so what he asked us to do was work with students to come up with recommendations for doing what he called an SDG virtual mobility project, which means I think of virtual mobility as study abroad at home. So if you want to have global connections, but you don't have the time or you might not have the money to go abroad, how do you bring abroad here? And in Europe, it seems they refer to this as virtual mobility. So that's the term that it used. So Amy and I launched a seminar, and we also launched and ran this global community of practice for about a semester and a half. And these are all the different partners from around the world that came to the table through our president. And this was a partnership primarily between McGill University in Canada and Georgia Tech, but it also included Edinburgh and Geneva and Monterey Tech in Mexico, and then University of Cape Town in South Africa. And so we would get together once a month with the different representatives from those various universities and talk about the basics of how we might set up a virtual mobility project among our universities. And then at the same time, Amy and I had a small seminar class. This was during COVID, so it was mostly virtual, where we had students learning about the SDGs and then doing research and making recommendations at the end for how to advance the SDGs in relation to their own interests and curricula. And so you see at the bottom here, we had a chemical engineering student who came up with a whole proposal for the chemical engineering department of how to integrate the SDGs into the core learning curriculum in chemical engineering. And then they also had recommendations overall for how to advance or how to develop a virtual mobility project as part of the curriculum that they thought students would be interested in.
So this next program is the Sustainable Communities Summer Internship Program that's actually run out of our office at Georgia Tech. Jenny always laughs at me because anytime anyone asks me what's my favorite part of working at SLS or what's the best program we do, this is always the one because it is my favorite, and I call it the gateway program. It's how we really draw students into both Serve, Learn, Sustain and the RCE Greater Atlanta as well. So we have run it for 5 summers. This past summer we had over 90 students in the program. It is a paid summer internship, again, run out of Georgia Tech, but in the last 2 years we've been able to figure out how to actually add a few students in from other universities, so we're continuing to broaden that. The internship itself places students to work with community and government organizations in and around the Atlanta area. So we have a very large number of community partners that apply to be internship hosts, and then we have a fairly extensive interview process that includes having students interview with the partners that interest them, and then we do a matching in the spring, and then the students are interns for 12 weeks over the course of the summer, beginning in May and ending in August. So students are not randomly assigned to these partners. They're matched according to the project work that the partner has, as well as the skills of the student. And so far, our ratings among the students and the partners is very high. So as I said, this is the 5th summer. We just finished our 5th summer. As part of the internship program, we also have the students participate in a summer seminar. Initially, the seminar was focused on equity and social innovation, but in the last couple of years, we've also added in the Sustainable Development Goals. So students are doing work, and then they're also learning about why that work matters, how they would connect that to things like equity and social innovation and the SDGs, how they use their technical and scientific expertise to work in community organizations or to impact communities. So it's all sort of tied together. As part of the summer seminar this year, we incorporated field trips. So every other week, students go in a large group to one of our partner hosts. They learn about the work of the partner. They talk about how the SDGs are enacted locally. They then also learn about critical thinking in terms of the work that they're doing for their particular partner, how that might tie into other work that's being done in the communities. And then they have small discussion groups in the alternating weeks where they're meeting with a facilitator and actually, incorporating that learning into the discussion. So trying to make all those connections between the projects, the SDGs, the work that's being done in Atlanta, and how that also connects to RCE Greater Atlanta and the work that we're trying to do. As part of this also, students contribute to a group journal. So they do regular reflections with particular questions that are asked by Ruthie Yao, one of our colleagues who also facilitates the seminar, and kind of helps them weave together the key things that they're learning, you know, and also then learn from their peers as well. So the objective is to try to help them sort of help each other as they're going through this learning process.
All right, and the last one, yes, the last one that we're going to share with you is, for the first time this last summer, we had an option as part of that summer internship program where the full seminar is an audit credit seminar, so it shows up on students' transcripts, but they don't get any credit for it. We had an option we made it also into a course, so students could take it for 3 credits as a full course that I taught in city and regional planning, and it would count towards our Sustainable Cities minor, which is run out of city and regional planning. So we had 5 students take advantage of that, and they did just more in-depth work than the students in the audit credit seminar. One of the things that they did was work with their internship site to do some kind of project that would help them really understand how to localize the SDGs, and hopefully it was done in collaboration and under the supervision of their internship supervisor, in the hopes that it would also help advance the local organization's work as well. So we had students, you can see the left swirly graphic is about localizing the SDGs for a local project that was called Inspire and Empower, which is about empowering women to go into STEM. And we had students do interesting things. The graph at the bottom is about a student who worked for a social entrepreneur who had a local urban garden that was specifically for bartenders and restaurant workers to help them deal with mental health. And the one at the top was a student who actually worked in infrastructure and sustainability and facilities management at Georgia Tech, and she was trying to help them understand how they could advance the SDGs by doing energy work with community partners, which is not usually what facilities works on. So that's just 3 examples of what they did in that class. And now we're just going to share a couple key lessons learned and then go on to the last slide, which is opening up for discussion. So really, we just highlighted across all of these examples, some of which were RCE and some of which were Georgia Tech. And actually, the internship program, the small group facilitators, we have about 90 students in that program this past summer. And the small group facilitators, some of them actually came from the RCE. And so we engaged partners from other institutions in helping lead the small group discussions every other week. So that's a way in which we've really been able to take RCE collaborations and incorporate them into some of our own programs. So the key lessons learned were really the importance of localizing the SDGs, that SDGs really come alive through place-based learning and local case studies, that is how students start to see what this global framework really means on the ground. And that field trips, going to see them in action, is much more impactful than case studies also. Talking across projects, so Chris mentioned this, that having students be involved in their own internship, but then really talk to other students about what they're doing in their internships promotes understanding of connections and the importance of what many of us know as multi-solving, right? How do you solve, or how do you address more than one SDG or more than one problem at a time? And that students can help partners connect to the SDGs, including partners really need to target the SDGs not just to the local region, but to their work in particular. And helping to localize those targets is something students can help them do. The second big thing is the importance of teaching the framework of the SDGs via umbrella concepts. So things like the 5 Ps, which most of us are familiar with from the UN, to have a more systems approach, but also, very importantly, I think, and this is important for a lot of faculty, that the SDGs be taught through a critical lens. The SDGs are by no means perfect. They skirt around a lot of issues that the UN cannot address because they have to have it pass unanimously. So there's a lot of human rights critiques of the SDGs, for example. There's almost no treatment of racial equity in the SDGs. So that gets to the third thing, which is teaching it through an equity lens, which is something we do a lot of. And that includes critiquing the SDGs and figuring out how to take them more deeply into equity. The third big umbrella lesson is to teach collaboration and reflection. I think the partnerships SDG is oftentimes not problematized enough. We know from the RCE network how hard it is to do collaboration. And we know from the conflict resolution work that you all do so well here at Salisbury how hard it is to collaborate across differences and across conflict. And also in a place like Georgia Tech, which focuses on STEM, reflection is almost never taught. And so really, how do you do, socio-emotional learning is dealt with a lot in the SDG literature and tools at the K-12 level, but not at the college level. And so figuring out really what does it mean to teach the SDGs from a reflective lens. Our students in that one class identified this as one of the absolute most important things, which is very different than, say, working with a faculty member to figure out how they can incorporate, you know, SDG 10 into their curriculum, right? It's a different thing. The fourth thing is that SDG education can facilitate global learning across borders. I've even worked in study abroad, and we were, both Amy, Henry, and I were shocked at how much the students in that little seminar loved the couple times that they talked to their counterparts in those other countries, all virtually for like 1 hour, but it made this huge impact on them, and it was kind of stunning. So I think figuring out how to do that more could be really important. And the last thing, which I can't really read, engage students in the SDGs via intentional programming. It's okay. Focused on SDG leadership and professional development. So that is something that we have figured out is really a key niche role for the RCE, and our students from Atlanta are going to talk about that more in our next presentation, so I'm not going to steal your thunder. And these are the questions we thought we could engage in some conversation around, which are, or we can talk about whatever you want, but these are things we continually grapple with. What's the value add of the SDGs as a framework? So you can teach SDG-related action without ever talking about the SDGs. Or you can just say, oh, this group is working on hunger issues. That relates to SDG 1 or SDG 2 or whatever you want to say, and then never talk about the SDG again, right? So what is the value added of really emphasizing the framework and the targets and the indicators, especially if they are not localized, right? The second question is, what does it mean for students and community partners to engage with the SDGs together? How do you do that in a way that community partners really want to do it? They've already got enough on their plates, and this is not always a priority for them. So that's something worth discussing, I think. And the last is, what's the value of engaging students in the SDGs via the RCE rather than just through our own programs in our own institutions? What is the RCE network and the RCE framework? How do we take advantage of that most? So that's it. I'm thinking maybe, I can hardly see you from behind this podium. So maybe we'll step out from behind it and just, what time is it? We still have 10 minutes. So we can talk about any of this, or we can take questions, whatever you want to talk about. Oh, what a surprise. Pam has her hand up. Pam, can I take that student in the back first?
They used to be my friends.
Is that okay?
We love you, Pam.
We love you, Pam, but we're going to take the student in the back first. And then you second.
My question is, you talked about how the sustainability goals are not necessarily perfect in their current state. So how would we go about identifying what goals may be good or bad in the future?
So the question is, thinking about the SDGs as imperfect, how would we go about identifying good or bad SDGs in the future? Jenny, take the mic. You got to use the mic. Otherwise, they can't hear you. Or I'll come over here.
Well, I guess in my experience, the good or the bad depends on what are your regional challenges, right? I mean, you have 17 SDGs. Not all of them apply to what you're trying to accomplish, say in Salisbury, or what we are trying to accomplish in North Texas or Georgia. And I think the best way to do that is sort of do a SWOT analysis. And that's how we did, kind of just get your folks together and figure out what are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and pick up those and work towards the SDGs, because some of the SDGs might be relevant to you, but others might not, which is why we see this theme with all the RCEs having different focus, like Georgia Tech has so much on social justice and service learning, UTA or RCE North Texas has so much on public-private partnerships, whereas it's climate change for Georgetown. So I guess, you can pick and choose. I don't think any of them are good or bad. It's just how your region wants to approach it.
The other thing that we have learned is really just, rather than thinking about good or bad, is thinking about how do you teach students to approach the SDGs from a critical lens. And especially in our case, we're always thinking about equity. So how do you really, and equity is always the last thing thought about in sustainability, which is why many of us like the SDGs, because there's more equity in the SDGs than there usually is when we're talking about sustainability. So, but if you can teach students to have a critical lens, you can teach them about what it means to collaborate, and you can teach them that socio-emotional learning component, then you could look at any of the SDGs at a deeper level, right, knowing that they came out of a worldwide political process that is ignoring lots of things, right, that has to get them passed. And instead of thinking them as, the way we teach them is instead of thinking of them as like, these are set targets and the goal is just to advance the targets, that they are starting points for critical thinking about how to advance as a region towards having a sustainable world that has these kinds of principles as like the North Star. Does that make sense? Okay, I have to go to Pam, or I'm gonna lose her as a friend. Okay, let me go to Pam, then I'm gonna come back to you, because we're probably gonna continue this thread. I don't wanna lose Pam.
She's back as my friend. Well, actually, I just wrote down what you said. I quoted you, Jenny. I actually had a question, though, for your global mobility course, or virtual mobility course. It used to be called, I think we called it Collaborative Online International Learning or something, COIL, right, through NYU. Anyway, I wondered how that went, because I see great potential for our RCE Americas and other RCE Global, and I'd love to know, like, how it went or how it would go, and I don't know, just the follow-up of that. It sounds great.
So that was, as I mentioned, it was a specific request made by our president to do that. So at this point, Amy and I and the whole kind of community of that global community of practice, we're basically doing it and reporting to our president and I think she's called the principal of McGill. And then we gave them our recommendations, and now it's in their, we're waiting on them to tell us how they want to move forward with it. So, but I am happy to share the recommendations. We have a whole PowerPoint that we put together about kind of what worked and what we think would have to be put in place for it to be successful. And I can share that with you, since you're my friend. I'll share it. Roger.
So I'm just jumping back to that earlier question, and when we talk about the imperfection of the global goals, they're global goals. And I think if Chuck were here, he would say regions have their additional goals of sustainability when they talk about long-term future generation needs, healthy ecosystems, meeting the needs of the most vulnerable, worst off in their communities. And so the imperfection is partly, it's up to each community to also not only localize the global goals, but also figure out what are the additional sustainable development goals within the larger paradigm of what sustainable development means. Yeah.
I think another really important add-on to that is that even at the regional level and even the local level, the voices of low-income communities of color are left out at those levels, which means you have to get even more hyper-local if you're doing this from an equity perspective. And then even if those voices have a seat at some of these tables that actually gets translated into goals at the level of, say, local government or something, those don't always apply to the work that a community-based organization is doing on a daily basis, right? I mean, they'll apply loosely, like you probably, for most of these organizations, could make an argument that their work, if they're successful, is going to help to, advance certain goals at the local government level, but it doesn't really impact them on a daily basis, right? So for them, what was so neat about that swirly thing that you saw is that what that student did was really take the goals of things like gender equality and really translate them exactly into the programs of that particular Center for Sustainable Communities, that's our partner, and say, webinars that you do every month on highlighting women in STEM, like make XYZ a topic that gets talked about in those webinars, like exactly translating them into their programs. So that's one of the things. I think the hyper local is key to what you were talking about earlier, Philip, which is what I think one of the things many of us love about the RCEs is that it does emphasize deep collaborations with communities, and we are oftentimes talking about like real local communities, not just like the city of Atlanta, right? And so that hyper-local level is really important. Someone over here had their hand up. Kate.
It's okay. I don't need the microphone.
You do because they're recording.
Got it. Okay. Because anyway. I think that the idea of perfection in anything it can be limiting because it puts a ceiling on what can be achieved and what's possible. So I would say, like, think about it from that perspective. It's an opportunity to make something, like, just to keep going forward. I don't know. That's. Yeah, sorry.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. I think we're out of time, and so, Brittany, do you want me to just pass it to our? Do you want me to introduce them? I think isn't it you guys? Yeah.
Hello. I'm Audrey. I'm a student at UGA, University of Georgia, in their Sustainability Certificate program. I'm also an econ and sociology student, and I am the RCE liaison to Greater Atlanta. I got involved with that just through going to an action group, and then Jenny messaged me on the side and, did not escape her grasp. So I'm now an intern. But yeah, so our presentation is called Cross-Pollination, Sharing Ideas and Information Across Institutions. The main theme just being finding similarities in some respect, whether if you're inside an institution, you have similar missions as another organization, you're working in the same community, and then sharing your resources, your innovations, and your best practices. So trying to not have duplicity or doing two things in two different areas, trying to combine resources, and we'll see that in both Aditya's project, or all of RCE's Greater Atlanta's project in the fellowship program, which is cross-institutional, and then a workshop I'm doing at UGA, which is through student organizations. So there's both kind of microcosms of this, and then also bigger picture applications. But this is our little group. We are also kind of a cross-institutional group that got started in the summer, kind of through the Sustainable Communities Internship program that Chris and Jenny were talking about at Tech, and we spent this whole summer kind of figuring out our core network functions, how those were going to work, who's going to do what work, how it will work to have different institutions coming together, kind of taking advantage of virtual meetings, commuting, because UGA is just a little beyond all the rest of the partners, but we have state students, Kennesaw students, so all across Metro Atlanta. So yeah, we spent the summer working on that, and then also the fellowship a lot. So that's where our cross-institutional kind of student collaborative group came to form, and now we're building onto that, adding more students, more institutions, and further refining what each core network function is, what our goals are, and what we're going to do. I'll pass it on to the...
Great. Good afternoon, all. My name is Aditya Desai, and I'm a graduate student at Georgia Tech. I study environmental engineering and public policy, and I have been involved with the RCE for about 5-6 months now. I was a part of the summer internship program of SLS that you just heard about, and from the get-go, I have been working with the RCE and Jenny and Chris, and this SVG Futures Fellowship is something that I have been involved in ever since my first day at the office. I remember we had the very first meeting was about a grant opportunity by the Atlanta Global Research and Education Collaborative, which is a collaborative between a few Atlanta universities, and they sponsor a few funding every year to facilitate programs aimed towards sustainability and global education. And in that meeting, I remember we had, I think, 1 month to figure out if we want to submit a proposal for this grant application. And we had a few ideas. Those ideas were changed into different ideas, and the fellowship was what we ended up with. So the fellowship actually began as a program with the Kennesaw State University. It was called the SDG Distinguished Ambassadors Fellowship. It was housed in Kennesaw State University, and it was run by one of the co-PIs of this fellowship, Lolade Owokoniran. And that program was about SDG education and leadership development among KSU students. And they partnered with community organizations in Kennesaw, some in Atlanta region also, and the students selected fellows in that program, they went on to do some great work in the KSU campus. And gaining inspiration from that program, we decided, you know, what about we expand this program to include all of the RCE in it? And that way we could incorporate all the RCE Greater Atlanta institutions, 11 in total, and we could reach a wider audience. We could interact with a lot of students from HBCUs and MSIs in Atlanta, which happens to be, I think, one of the most, Atlanta has, I think, the most HBCUs and MSIs in the country. And we wanted to take advantage of that and impart education about the SDGs to these students. And this is how we came to be. We plan to host virtual and in-person workshops throughout this academic year, 2022 and 23. The first semester, the fall 22 semester, would be focused more on education about the SDGs, and we involve this work around a lot of our partners, both in academia and in governments, nonprofit organizations, some corporates, some startups. Notably, we have the City of Atlanta's Office of Resilience as one of our partners, who have agreed to host a bunch of fellows for one of the action projects that they will be doing in the spring semester. And our outcomes, we want our outcomes to be that the students should know more about what the UN SDGs are, because a lot of times when you say sustainability, people often associate it only with climate action, which is definitely not the case. But we want to impart it through the justice and equity lens, as Jenny had the conversation with you all before, how imperfect the SDGs could be sometimes, and it's important to look at them through a justice and equity lens. We also want the fellows to advance UN SDGs in their daily and professional lives, and not just as a namesake. And we want to have them incorporate all the SDGs in their daily lives. And I think the last point is not quite visible, but it says to incorporate impact as a measure of career success. Now, oftentimes when we're dealing with students in universities, their career success, often they can only attribute it to no, I think the last word is still kind of down there, but it's fine. A lot of times career success is, to students, is how much money they make in a career or how many hierarchical ladders they climb in that career. But we want to help incorporate that having an impact on society can also be can also lead to satisfaction, and transforming someone else's lives is also a great measure of success in your career. And this is the SVG Futures Fellowship. We just started last week. Our first inauguration event was just this Saturday, 2 days ago, and we had a tremendous response. We have about 32 student fellows across 9 RCE Greater Atlanta affiliated institutions. And our next event is going to be with a startup called Carmelize, and they do an awesome job. in raising awareness and giving a platform to sustainable businesses across cities in the US. We are also going to be partnering with the Canadian Consulate General in the US in Atlanta. They will also play host to one of our events revolving around one of the pillars of sustainability being peace. And we hope that some RCEs or all of the RCEs here could also help us host an event, virtually or in person, this semester or the next semester. And we can definitely discuss that going forward. But I would like to, now you heard about the cross-institutional framework that we have. Now let's hear about the interinstitutional framework that is in place in UGA.
Yeah, so I've tentatively named it Dogs for Sustainable Development because I thought I needed something catchy, but I'll be taking branding feedback. We're not set on that yet because this is in November, so this is has been planned throughout the semester, but this is for the future. But so this is focused on student organizations at UGA. We are a very large university. We have about 30,000 undergraduates, so there's quite a large number of student organizations, and going to involvement fairs, you start to realize they even will place organizations together based on their general missions, and those student organizations themselves are looking around realizing that there's 3 other people who have like the same 4 goals listed in their poster board, and they're all working with the same community groups, and they never knew each other existed because of just how large our community outreach can be and how large our school is. So I kind of saw a need there and a want from the student organizations themselves to be able to collaborate more. So this will be a workshop focused around the SDGs over one evening with potential to make this like a semester-based thing or to have more regular meetings between breakout groups. But there will be 2 types of breakout groups. One will be by SDGs, so some of the themes that come up a lot are nutrition access, social equity, ecological conservation. A lot of them are either department student groups, so more educational, and then there's also a lot of community-based work that works with community organizations in Athens. So those will have breakout groups that both group people together by their mission, and then also trying to combine different SDGs and see what gaps you can fill and what things you haven't really considered as being included in your mission, including social equity and nutrition access and sustainability and nutrition access and all those sorts of things. And that discussion will be based around trying to get student groups to reflect on what needs they're trying to fill, and then kind of scaling that up into what bigger picture that's fitting into and that work is filling into, because we want them to see that their work goes beyond Athens and that Athens can be kind of a test site for projects that can be later scaled up to Georgia or to beyond that, and that their work can go beyond school and go beyond just their time in their community, because these are very passionate people who put a lot of time into it, and we don't just want that to stop once they graduate. And then I think a big part of that will be creating a network between them where they can organize together and they can make their voices heard, they can amplify their impact throughout the community, through campus, and potentially through the state by working together, whether that's on events together or just joining forces, their resources, their contacts in both the community and on campus. And then we also want them to consider their decision-making process for because some of these organizations, have their own boards and they're part of a state or they're part of a national group of organizations, and they have a fair amount of influence and are a very large organization. So we want to make sure we're bringing in questions of equity and inclusion, and who are you asking when you're going to go out and do this project in the community? Is this really what they need? And a lot of student groups are really good at that, but also hopefully the student groups can inform each other about, we've learned that this is actually what this specific group in the community needs, and we've learned that this is a really great person to talk to who's really in touch with whatever specific issue you're working on. So trying to get them to really incorporate the equity and inclusion aspect of that. So the outcomes, the projected outcomes, that hopefully there will be a sustained cross-organizational collaboration that will go beyond just a one-time event or a one-time conversation, getting these people in contact with each other, having a larger network and shared contact information between them so that they can kind of have a better idea of who's on campus, what is being done, how they can either contribute to that or kind of ask for resources and ask for help when they find themselves in a situation where they don't know how to move forward, when somebody else has already figured out a best practice for that situation, or how to kind of make way into maybe local government or something like that, or a good contact to get through in our local government. So trying to share those resources for both individual furthering of individual organizations and also for unifying forces for a common goal. And then we also would love, obviously, to get them involved in RCE Greater Atlanta, and part of the workshop will be talking about SDGs, making sure everybody's up to date and informed about how their work is fitting into that. And yeah, just informing them of how this goes beyond Athens and the community, and how there's people who work on this throughout their careers, who bring this type of collaboration and involvement with them throughout their careers, and how that's a really valuable skill to have in the future. But yeah, so far we have 18 student organizations who have RSVP'd, and hoping to get up to 25, and there's multiple students within those organizations, because a lot of them, maybe it's a service group that does tons of different projects, or a lot of these groups have missions that work across SDGs, so having different students within the same organization going to different breakout sessions, and we'll further refine the discussion and the structure as we learn more about who's coming to the event, to make sure that we're getting like good groups of people together in good planned breakout sessions and all of that. But yeah, that's the student organization workshop. I think we have one more slide. Oh yeah, well this is our discussion now. So we wanted to kind of open it up to see how everybody else in their institution has seen or experienced this need for cross-pollination, as we call it, and how RCE can be a conduit for unification of work, and how maybe you see that one institution is bearing a lot of responsibility, or one person is bearing a lot of responsibility, or multiple groups are, you kind of get to a room and you realize, or you get in contact with somebody months later and you realize they've done all this work that you spent so long figuring out the kinks of, and they could have just been like, oh, I actually did that like a year ago, and this is the exact thing you needed to do, and it's frustrating. And then, yeah, so we, how to share both responsibilities and resources, kind of lift each other up. But yeah, if there's any questions y'all have or comments on that. Yes, Kate. Oh, do you want the?
That was a very illuminating presentation. Thank you, because it's so important to make practical connections to how to do this, like how to actually do this work. Like, what does that look like? And so my question for you is, can you talk a little bit about the process that you used to identify your student organizations, and then how did you actually invite them, and what did you, like, what were your marketing strategies? Like, I'm sure social media played into it maybe a bit. And do you have a social media kind of campaign to advertise? Yeah, if you can speak to that process, that would be awesome.
Yes, definitely. So as far as the social media and other kind of outreach things, I'm an intern at our Office of Sustainability, which is about 30 other student interns who do work in like a really wide variety of capacities across campus. And there's like there's strategic communications team, so I'm always able, they're working in the office with me. I'm like, hey, do you mind just contributing your knowledge to this? You know, graphic design, like, can I just give you some information? We're all kind of working together towards our projects. This being my, kind of trying to help each other out in the same framework of going across projects to help each other. For identifying the students, that's actually something I worked on over the summer, was kind of creating a little bit of a database going to our, we have a online registration, basically, where if a student group is recognized on campus, they have to have their contact information, a little bit about them. So I went through, I think it was like 900 organizations, but I went through all of them and I organized them by SCG, if there's an undergrad or a graduate organization, the current contact information, and then so all sorts of information like that was put into like an Excel sheet that our whole office has actually been able to use when they're like, oh, we have this opportunity, like, do you have people who are interested in conservation? So then I can just make it spit out the conservation groups. So that's been really useful in identifying those groups. And then I think the biggest part of getting people involved is to not just be online about it. So I did go to an involvement fair, and I just went up to each person, and I was like, it's just so much easier to have a conversation, and so I feel like there's so much more, I'll feel a lot more that like obligated almost in a way to like actually, you know, get involved, or they get a lot more interested and they can ask you questions, and there's just a lot more engagement that way. So that I thought was one of the best ways to actually get people interested in this type of thing. And I received like a lot. It was very encouraging to go to that, because a lot of people were like, oh yes, this is exactly, I've been meaning to even go ask that group for their email, because I feel like we could have an event together and it would be so useful. So it's great that like somebody else is already doing that. But yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So we don't have a sustainability office here at Salisbury, but I guess I'm just wondering, like, if, like, let's say people from the RCE, and you know, students involved with the RCE wanted to collaborate with the Environmental Student Association to push for a sustainability office to be created, what would you say would be the key things that we would have to go about doing to making drastic institutional change on this campus?
Well, yeah, I mean, the question was just creating a sustainability office. I don't know if anybody's experienced going from none to some. Oh, if you do, that's great. They'll say, I'm very lucky, and mine existed. I just had to walk in.
Hi. I did have some experiences, including with companies, on how to engage them in sustainability. And I think the main thing is convince the stakeholders you have that it's something important to do. So once they're engaged, it just flows, the process just flows. But convincing people why have it, how important it is, what kind of difference it would mean for marketing, for image, for selling courses, even if it's a university or institution, or selling a product if it's a company. I think if you get stakeholders engaged and convinced it's something important, it will flow. But there is a convincing step that sometimes is not that easy, and it makes a difference. Once they're convinced, it's a matter of getting the snowball rolling downhill. But convincing, I think it's key. Engaging them, making sure they understand why it's important, how important, and what benefit, not only financial, it could be image, it could be marketing, it could be branding, whatever, how important that would be. I think that's key. Thank you.
I actually do have a bit of a tidbit from UJ that I wasn't necessarily involved in, but our whole sustainability program comes from our student green fee, and I think it's like $5 per student in your student fees, and that's what funds all of our interns, all of our programs, and that was completely student organized, where it's just I think SGA, Student Government Association, was able to campaign for, people just became really passionate involved, and the entire student body was able to campaign to, because we're a public university, was to the university systems of Georgia, because in order to make a change to cost of enrollment, you either need, I forget, it was something, or like 75% student approval of the increase in fees, and they got like 90% of UGA's approval, I think. So it was really just all student support and outreach in that way. Yeah, sorry.
We had a similar thing here in Maryland that has been in progress. I know, like at my undergrad alma mater, they had the SGA had a green fund there that they would use to allocate some of the money that the SGA fees that students paid would go towards helping sustainability efforts there. So if we do the same thing on the SGA here, that's an idea. And then also having state coalitions like what you mentioned. There's something called the Maryland Student Climate Action Coalition that has been pretty active the past couple of years here.
Going once. believe that is all for Greater Atlanta. So, go Georgia.